With the recent Irish general election result, it seems like the country is more divided than ever. In 2022, polling showed that only 4% of voters were concerned over immigration. This year, immigration is now the most important issue for voters at 29%, over both housing and healthcare. This follows a very similar trend in the UK, where immigration and asylum was considered the single most important issue for our 2024 general election. This year we saw Reform UK, a populist and nationalist party led by Nigel Farage, who put immigration policies at the forefront of their campaign, getting over 4 million votes with a total share of 14%. In Ireland, we are seeing a similar sharp divide and a breakdown in the social fabric of the country, with a rise in protests, riots, strained public services versus the pro-immigration campaigners who seem to want things to continue as they have done, with accusations such as far right.
You should feel the same way if you call yourself Irish, but you don't because you have no pride in your nation.
Pure textbook.
Is that your opinion?
Right.
Globalism and an out-of-touch political elite. In some areas, this is seeing social cohesion in Ireland to be at breaking point.
We're afraid we're going to be labelled as racist and that we don't like people from different places, but that's not the case.
And we have seen this before. European countries like Sweden, who spearheaded the policy of mass immigration, now seem to be rolling back after the country has seen an unfortunate rise in no-go zones and ghettoization, gang crimes and violence.
What sort of violence have you seen?
I've seen people getting shot, I've seen people die, people getting hurt, mothers crying in despair. I've seen almost everything, but there's nothing you can do about it.
As well as the rise of fundamentalist radical Islam. This has me wondering, is Ireland heading in the same inevitable direction? Hi everyone, it is Jack. Welcome back to my channel, or if you are new, hello. I'm here next to my Christmas tree, bringing you a bit of festive spirit today, even though we are talking about a tough topic. So if you like my channel, please make sure you like the video, subscribe, comment down below, let me know your thoughts about the immigration stance in Ireland or elsewhere. This seems to be a very pertinent issue for so many countries in the West, including the United States, Canada, and many countries in Europe. And if you want to support the channel, you can head on over to the Jack Jewell Uncut Substack. For a very modest amount, I'm doing a December 25% off promotion, so link is on the screen or in the description. And now back to the video. Well, as lots of my viewership should know by now, I'm in fact Irish. I'm from the Republic of Ireland. Lots of people don't understand. They often say, are you from the South? Whereas in Ireland, we don't really refer to it as the South. We usually refer to it as the Republic of Ireland. So I'm from Galway, which is a county on the West Coast. So I was born and raised there to Irish parents and fully Irish through and through, as far as I know. And I moved to the UK when I was 19 years old to attend drama school, and I haven't left 11 years later. While Irish culture wasn't exactly the right fit for me, and I much prefer it in England, that is not to say that I still don't deeply care about the people that are there, the culture that Ireland has, which historically has been a very strong Gaelic culture, bringing many attractions to the world, such as their music, folklore, gift of the gab, they really can talk in Ireland, and Guinness. First, let's talk about the government in Ireland, because most of my viewership are not from there, and you probably don't know what the hell is going on. I myself was even quite out of touch till recently. Well, to break it down for you, in both 2020 and 2024, no single party won a majority to form a government. We pretty much saw the same result last time as we did this time, with the three main parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and Sinn Féin, yes, all pretty similar names, getting a split of the vote. Fianna Fáil describe themselves as a centrist to centre-right political party, while Fine Gael also take the same position, but also describe themselves as a party of the progressive centre, whatever that means, right? These two main parties have dominated Irish politics for many years. And then we have the third party, Sinn Féin, which is a Republican, socially democratic party, at least that's how they describe themselves. And up until recently, it spearheaded the main populist movement in Ireland. They are pro-uniting the nation, so having all the counties part of the Republic of Ireland instead of Northern Ireland being in Britain. Personally, I don't think they'll ever reach that goal. I myself feel like we should move on from that stuff, but lots of people have been feeling disillusioned by them recently as they have sort of abandoned their populist values and succumbed to a lot of the progressive takes we're seeing people rejecting, wokeism, as well as their poor stance on immigration. So all in all, we're not seeing much difference here between the parties. Here in the UK, we refer to the Uni Party, which is the Labour and the Tories, because since 1997, since Tony Blair's era, there really hasn't been much much difference between these two parties. These parties seem to be prioritizing a globalist agenda over national identity, and of course have been captured by the woke mind virus. So this seems to be the case in Ireland. And while we have Reform UK here, which are definitely going against the establishment view, unfortunately, Ireland doesn't seem to have any political party that is really offering an alternative. Instead, they have lots of independents who actually manage to secure lots of seats. This does not give the Irish people much confidence that there is some sort of alternative view, whether you are pro-immigration or not. Also similar to the UK, this saw the lowest turnout since 1923, which was 59.6% people voting. So clearly, whatever people's opinions are, left or right, it seems like they are becoming disillusioned with the political class and deflated, so much so that they don't even see the point in voting, which is really sad. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are no friends with Sinn Féin, so last time we saw a coalition between them and the Greens to form a government. It looks like something similar will happen this time, except the Greens lost most of their seats, thank God. So unfortunately, it looks like Ireland is going to end up with the exact same political class ruling their country. Now maybe they'll make a turn if they get a good leader, maybe they'll make a drastic change in their policies. And of course, I want nothing but the best for the family I have that live there, the friends I have that live there, and I am apprehensive to see where this goes over the next decade. Well, I referred to the parties being out of touch with the public, and Leo Varadkar, the first openly gay Prime Minister of Ireland.
One thing I strongly agree with the Deputy on is the need to set a target to have a number of people from ethnic minorities in areas of the public service, civil service, which is very white. Very white.
Resigned earlier this year after a disastrous referendum result, which aimed to modernize the definition of family and a mother's role in the Constitution. Varadkar described this poll, which just happened to fall on International Women's Day, as a chance to do away with the quote-unquote very old-fashioned, very sexist language about women. However, while all main political parties campaigned for a yes vote, the result was staggering, with 68% and 74% overwhelmingly voting no against each question. This was a really embarrassing result, really showed that the political class did not preempt what was going to happen here. And Varadkar then resigned.
And after 7 years in office, I don't feel I'm the best person for that job anymore.
So it appears, in fact, that Ireland is more socially conservative than the leading political class. But in reality, are they? For me, Ireland has come a long way in being far more liberal than it was when I was a teenager, in which it was very scary for me to come out as gay. People did really not talk about it back then. And of course, gay marriage was not legalized. But then it was in 2015 with the collapse of Catholicism and then all of this woke progressive stuff being pushed on us.
Oh gee, you got your braids done. I love them.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to get them done for longitude. I think they're so exotic.
You shouldn't. My culture isn't an accessory.
What do you mean? I've never tried them before. I want to get them.
Yeah, I know, but this is for my culture, not for your fashion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have known, but I had to learn.
I should have known, but I had to learn. I should have known, but I had to learn.
You really compare the two, you could say they're socially conservative, but really I think most people just recognize the bullshit, recognize the woke shit, and want some common sense brought back, some reality brought back. And this referendum really showed that. So what has been going on with the immigration crisis in Ireland? Well, as of April 2024, Ireland had 149,000 people enter the country with a net level of over 80,000. And this is the highest level they have seen since 2008. The key difference here is that 86,000 of these immigrants were from non-EU countries. And this has happened since the migration crisis, an outbreak of multiple wars. Think of places like Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. We're also seeing a very rapid change of demographic in Ireland, similar to here in the UK, with now 77% of the population being white Irish. Now, this is down from 82% in 2016, 87% in 2006, and well over 90% in the 1990s. So I was born in 1994. Whether you think this is a good or bad thing, we cannot argue that it is a very rapid change in a very short space of time. We've not really seen anything like this in the history of the West. So it is essentially a bit of an experiment, and we're bound to see pros and cons to this sort of change. And with a declining fertility rate, not only in Ireland, but all over the world, Ireland is now depending on immigration for its economy, for its jobs, etc. Some people predict that, in fact, by 2050, there's a chance that the white population of Ireland could become a minority, which is absolutely crazy. Some people argue very much against that point, but time time will tell. Now, is this in itself an issue? Well, I'm sort of new to speaking about this topic, and if you had asked me 2 years ago, is there an issue with the white population in the UK or Ireland declining, I probably would have been taken aback by that question, assuming that there are racist undertones, white supremacist undertones, etc. But when you think about it, take a country like Japan, who have very strict immigration policy. For example, you said that they were going to see an influx of lots of migrants from Europe, and then someone said, well, the Japanese population are set to become a minority. You would probably in the West say that's not right. They deserve to preserve their culture. If we change the demographics completely, then it will no longer be the country people want to go to. So I really do understand that point. And for me, I think it's important to protect the indigenous culture of the country while also obviously having a pro-immigration, sensible policy so we can try and help people around the world. But maybe you're someone who loves this globalist change and this open border policy. Maybe you're someone who just doesn't think it's very relevant about ethnicity, about nationality for the country. I would be very interested to know how you feel. But whatever your persuasions is on this reality, it's definitely a topic that is taboo. People are afraid to speak about it. They'd rather kick the can further down the road. And if they don't talk about it, they don't recognize the predictions, they don't try and gauge how people feel about this, then the underlying problem will only get worse and worse. It seems like one of the criteria for politicians these days is to be very skilled in procrastinating, which is a sad reality. How is all of this change affecting Ireland? Well, Ireland has historically been a very pro-immigration country. I think they can really empathize with this because with the famine in the 1800s in Ireland, over 1 million Irish people emigrated to America. So they clearly see the value in a country helping another country out. And in 2015, in the height of the Syrian war, 84% of Irish people felt sympathetic towards Syrian refugees. So they definitely were not anti-immigration. However, compared to that time, we're seeing an historic high of asylum seeker claims, with over 400 claims being made every week in Ireland.
Ireland has taken in 41,000 Ukrainians already. There weren't enough mattresses or airbeds. A tent village installed at an Irish army base after the country officially ran out of state accommodation.
And since 2022, Ireland has taken in the highest per capita number of Ukrainian refugees above any other EU country. And while I truly believe that most people are decent people who really understand the importance of this and would not want to just turn people away, we are seeing a growing strain on public services, skyrocketing healthcare waiting lists, and a serious housing crisis in Ireland. It's now become one of the most expensive countries in the EU as well, with 46% above the average household expenditure. So you can see on this chart, the number of houses built compared with net migration is simply just not good enough to keep up with the demand. And we have seen a dramatic rise in the price of housing, meaning lots of young people growing up in the country feel they have no hope in ever securing a house. They actually have a lot of trouble even finding somewhere to rent in the cities. And this, as a result, has seen a lot of people leaving the country to places like Australia. In fact, 74% of people between the age of 18 and 24 express that they are considering leaving the country. It's very sadly true that Ireland has bitten off more than they can chew in this circumstance, with lots of migrants now having to be housed in tents because they simply do not have the space. So you can see because of this policy, it's really not a great experience for the immigrants either, who are obviously fleeing very difficult circumstances, at least lots of them are, and then they end up living in a tent beside a river. It is really a grim reality. And with this has left a lot of people in Ireland feeling frustrated and angry. They feel like their tax is being used to go to other people.
Just under 1,000 people. Yeah. And we got an extra 500 people just into the town itself.
We have 40% of our accommodation is gone.
We have the same issues. We lost all of our hotels. Tourism was our bread and butter in Carsavine.
If you take 40% of the spend power off the streets, it affects the downstream businesses.
When there are people in Ireland who are homeless, people who've been on waiting lists for housing for years who really need it.
In 90 days, we were told those 985 will be turned out to find their own accommodation. If they don't find it, the government will find it for them. There's thousands of homeless people already here that don't have homes. I live in the middle of a field in a mobile home because there's no home for me.
They are skeptical of immigrants being given social housing for people who need it in Ireland who've been on the waiting list a very long time.
The Irish and the long-term homeless here from all over the world are living and sleeping in the streets. And these people are on a housing list 20 and 30 years. But if you come in here off a plane with no passport, you're safe. It's just not right. So there.
And I really think that similar to the UK, we have people that are living in more affluent areas who have what we may call luxury beliefs. A lot of these are on the more woke side, in that they can devote a lot more of their time to thinking about the moral issue of these questions when it comes to issues like gender and race. And it is easy for them to sort of brand everyone as racist and discriminatory when perhaps their lives are not impacted by it directly.
Anyone listening to this, call me what the hell you like. Little do I care.
They may not be living near a hotel that's suddenly been housed with migrants, mainly men of military fighting age, and having natural concerns over the safety of their children and how their small town is going to change.
So many unvetted male people being brought over to this country, and they're planting them all in around schools, parks, and we're all feeling very unsafe.
So this is why I think it's so important we understand both sides of this debate. It will never work if one side just calls the other racist and that they have no valid concerns. Everyone's concerns are worth being listened to, and we will only find a solution if the political elite listen to everyone and give them ear equally.
And communities have to have some entry point to give a view,
so can they
to raise
no,
a concern.
then?
But that's not a veto. And in fairness to people...
But it's not a consultation if you can't say no either, is it?
Well, in the planning process, everybody's consulted. You can make your observation. Nobody has a veto.
But they can't say no.
There's a common perception that these people are uneducated. There's a disdain for the white working class, and something we're seeing here in Britain as well. And another taboo topic is, why are most of the migrants young men? You know, surely if we're going to take asylum seekers, the priority would be women and children.
When you're walking past a group of men and they're saying something to you in a different language and you don't know what they're saying, it's very, very intimidating.
And in the UK, up to 90% of all arrivals on these small boats are young single men. So it really begs the question, why are we seeing this difference? And of course, when we think about risks, when we think about crime, there is clearly a higher risk with men than there is with women and children. In terms of survival, you would also assume that men would have a higher chance of surviving in the countries they come from than women and children would. So this question really needs to be looked at, but it seems like no one is willing to address it and ask, why are we seeing this?
I know every man's name in this building. I know if they're married, the country where they're from. They're good men. Good, honest men that are looking to start a life for themselves.
And naturally, that makes people even more skeptical over the immigration. In fact, they wonder, are lots of these people economic migrants? Are some of these men claiming asylum when perhaps they do not have a right to?
Because the welfare system is better, because the Minister for Integration said that within 6 months you would have the key to your own house.
It is true that people see places like Ireland and the UK as a soft touch because we have great services for asylum seekers in terms of the housing we put them in terms of being able to give them a phone, to give them a spending allowance, food, and then eventually housing, and lots of them end up on the welfare system. So we need to consider these things. We can't keep avoiding it. And also, very like the UK, the government and the mainstream media have historically tried to avoid this issue as much as possible.
Leo Varadkar's government says it can tackle the problems around immigration with better messaging and tougher laws to censor what it deems as hate speech.
There is a perception that the political elite can decide what information is worthy of release, what information should our population be privy to, and that they are sort of trying to manage the narrative over people's attitudes towards immigration. Another mistake they make is assuming that people are stupid, that they are out of touch, when in fact lots of people can see what's going on.
Just messing around with our heads, this whole government, and I don't trust what's going on. I think they're puppets for other powers, the elites, you know, they're not caring for our own people.
And the more they avoid releasing the reality of what's going on and giving more transparency, the more skeptical people will become, and that will only lead to actually more rumors, possibly more misinformation.
They were here because far-right influencers circulated a rumour online that a young girl had been raped inside by 3 migrants.
The Gardaí said that the child was attacked by someone known to the child.
So do you think the Gardaí are telling the truth on everything?
Why did you circulate that rumour?
What do you mean circulate a rumour?
And with their fears of the radicalisation and the far right, surely the skepticism and lack of information will only build that movement more if there in fact is a strong one.
Is there a far right in Ireland, and what does it look like?
There may be a very small element
I've met grandparents coming into my office. I've met people from other countries. I've good friends from all over the world. They're not far right.
And a big thing, that data on nationality and ethnicity of perpetrators of crime in Ireland is not collected or reported on. And this is a big issue. In the UK, this is also not information they've been releasing. However, Reform UK are the only party who are lobbying for this data. The people deserve to know so they can make the appropriate decisions when it comes to elections. When knowledge is withheld, people naturally get suspicious and lose trust in the government. And arguably, Ireland could have been a lot smarter in these circumstances because we have seen this situation in Europe happened before with countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden. Sweden has sadly suffered a mass migration disaster. In 2015, with the Syrian war and the outbreak of this migration crisis, Sweden decided to lead the way, open their hearts to mass migration, and really model themselves as the moral country who were prepared to do whatever it takes to help others. But did they get positive results? Sweden had an all-time high of immigration in 2016 with over 160,000 people entering the country. In 2016, 2.14 out of 10.61 million of the population, so pretty much around a fifth, were now foreign-born. And this is double the figure than it was in 2000. So once again, we are seeing a rapid demographic shift with little policy or heed given to how to integrate communities and consideration on how, when you shove a bunch of cultures together with different religions, different values, different attitudes towards women and gay people and work ethic, all of these things, the assumed presumption that these people will arrive in the country and just recognize, oh, your country is liberal, your values are great, therefore that's the default and I'm going to take it on. I think in the West, we have become very arrogant and cocky over our liberalism. We have become ungrateful to the fact that we have liberal democracy, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, well, at least we used to, and freedom of association. We take this for granted and we assume it's the default. Well, in actual fact, most places in the world do not have societies like this. They do not view freedom in the same way that we do. Our overconfidence that people will arrive in our countries and simply embrace these values with open arms without any strategy to integrate is really our downfall. And what did the government and the elite class do? They ignored these issues, they swept them under the rug until it could no longer be avoided. Unfortunately, this has seen a huge rise of gang violence in Sweden, with Sweden now ranking the second highest per capita in gun violence in the EU, just below Albania. And this is such a drastic change from the very progressive, safe country that Sweden used to be. Sweden, very sadly, also has the highest rate per 100,000 of reported rapes than any other country in Europe as of 2022. In fact, in 2018, 58% of all rapes and reported rapes were perpetrated by foreign people. And in the cases where the victim did not know the attacker of their rape prior to it occurring, 80% of the attackers were foreign-born. Islam has also had a sharp rise in Sweden, with them taking lots of people from Muslim-majority countries. You could even see them electing a radical Islamist party to government as early as 2026. And that is just shocking. While virtually all Swedes identified as Christian from the 12th to the 20th century, this number has now fallen below 60%. And some scholars predict that the country will actually have a Muslim majority within this century. So again, it begs the question on how do we balance helping people with protecting our national identity? Because of course, if you had asked Sweden at the start, do you want to become an Islamic nation? They would have said, hell no. And lots of us should be rejecting that. Now, I'm not saying all Muslims are radical, but we cannot allow countries in the West to become Islamic majorities. That has never been what we're about in the West, right? And this is the issue with liberalism, in that we value freedom of belief. That is what liberalism is about. What do we do when those beliefs are at such contrast with each other and not compatible? This is the question that liberalism fails to answer. Now Sweden has been U-turning on its policy of mass migration, acting very fast, doubling the salary requirements for immigrants entering the country, massively upping deportations, and cutting the amount of asylum seekers they are taking in by 80%. In fact, they are even offering £25,000 to immigrants in order for them to re-migrate. So They are clearly freaking out, realizing, is it even too late for us to go back on this change we've made? You would think that other countries like Ireland would see this, and it's not just Sweden, it's places like Germany, places like the Netherlands, which have seen a lot of radical Islamist attacks. They could have easily preempted these examples far in advance and taken them into consideration when designing their immigration policy. Despite all the crime and unfortunate situations Sweden has suffered from, they are still being met with scorn and judgment from publications like, you guessed it, The Guardian. So we long for the day when immigration is not only a moral issue, but a practical issue on policy that takes into account the needs of the nation as well as people entering the country. And with the left, if they keep calling people racist and racist and racist, this problem is only going to get worse and worse, in my opinion. So why has Ireland wanted to pursue this policy? Well, Ireland does not really get involved in international war because they are a neutral country. And it seems like they wanted to take the position of being a moral country who is known for helping people, which again is a great intention.
I think that the Irish government is primarily concerned with appearing to be a modern European country, and they admire their European colleagues. They admire countries like Scandinavian countries like Sweden and so on that are progressive.
But it's important to understand that Ireland is a much smaller country than the UK or the US. And when you have an influx this large, we see a rapid change in small towns, with some towns having a very large percentage now being foreign-born.
And grassroots protests against refugee accommodation around the country. And that has begun to seep into places like Ballahadreen, which had a foreign-born population of nearly 40% in the 2022 census, a figure that has likely grown since.
Ballahadreen has always been, nice community, good people. But unfortunately, what has happened in recent years is Ballahadreen has become a town that has had issues over infrastructure and lack of development in certain quarters. So it is becoming a challenge, and I think that's real at the moment. Have become welcoming, are a welcoming town, but there's only so much that a town can take.
An example is Roscrea, which has a population of just 5,500 people, and they now are housing over 1,000 migrants.
We are one of the smallest towns in Tipperary, and we have 85% of international protection applicants. We have over 1,000 IPAs in town. There's only 5,500 of a population in this town. That's a huge amount to expect anybody to take on.
So this is a massive percentage. That's an additional 20% of the population of that small town, that small community. And when you live in a small, close-knit community, it's not like a big metropolitan city where everyone is living separate lives. In London, there are people of all creeds, religions, races. Doesn't bother me whatsoever. But at the same time, all of us live in our little bubbles with our friends. We don't necessarily mingle with these other communities like the government pretend we do. And what's so sad to see is that some of these small towns get told by the government at very short notice that the only hotel in their town is now closing down. They've broken a deal with the owner, and it's now going to be used to house migrants.
This is Racket Hall, the town's last hotel. It was recently closed to the public in order to accommodate up to 160 asylum seekers.
And they've even used tactics such as busing in the migrants at night, thus to avoid any disruption, perhaps go under the cover, who knows? But in my opinion, it is really breaking the foundation of trust that these people have for their country. And just to think, the only hotel in your town which is going to attract tourists, where people might go to have dinner and have drinks, is now unavailable. And the people in that town just have to suck up and bear it. They have no say over this. And unfortunately, this has led to lots of unrest and anger.
On the 15th of January, the first busload of 17 asylum seekers arrived.
You're selling out your own people, you scumbags, that's what you are, scumbags!
It included women and children, who had to run the gauntlet of angry protesters.
In November 2023, 3 children were stabbed in Dublin, which is very weirdly similar to the situation we had here in the UK, with 3 young girls being murdered and more being stabbed at a dance class, which followed with riots. And in Dublin, there were rumors that the perpetrator was Algerian. It was later confirmed that he was. This led to messages being posted online in groups. People took to the streets to protest, but then this devolved into riots. And these were some of the worst riots that Ireland has ever seen in history. And with a lack of clarity on crime statistics and what's really going on, this is naturally leading to more rumors. People don't know what to believe anymore. And people with concerns are being brandished as far right, meaning it's very hard to understand how big is the actual far right movement.
Despite the concerns, Ireland has no far right presence in Parliament. And while there are more anti-migrant candidates running in the election, few, if any, are expected to win.
Because of course, there's going to be people who are legitimately racist, who are legitimately white nationalists or whatever, but it's very hard to discern how much of a threat this is when we are accusing anyone that has concerns over immigration or their town being rapidly changed as far right. And while, of course, all violence is abhorrent, and I wish this never happened, it is an easy out for the government just to blame this on thuggery and racism, and then continue to avoid addressing underlying concerns in communities. And lots of protests we've seen all over Ireland have actually been very peaceful, but unfortunately, they have seen a sharp rise in arson attacks on hotels and refugee centres in advance of migrants coming in. So it is clearly a problem. They really need to face up and address these concerns. So what's next? Well, we have the same political parties. It doesn't seem like this is going to get any better. And it's no wonder why the people of Ireland are growing more apathetic, not just towards immigration, but other issues that are not improving, only getting worse. And then it really poses this question of how do we deal with crisis of war, climate in the West where people are needing to flee their country? Because with immigration, we always have this head and heart scenario where it pulls at our heartstrings. Of course, we don't want to think of anyone not having somewhere to go to or risking their lives in devastating circumstances. So in order to help the rest of the world, should we just accept that the fabric and culture of our country is going to change rapidly? Should we accept that hardworking people in the West need to suffer economic consequences in order to help other countries, and that is just the reality we're in? And what about the inevitable crime that happens? Murders, rapes, rise of gang crime, ghettoization. Is this just collateral damage in the ultimate pursuit of morality? And look, maybe you do take that stance. Maybe you think that these mass immigration policies are more important than national identity. But what happens when a country crosses the line and starts to betray its own people? So here's my stance on it. I think immigration policy should be a synergetic policy that aims to benefit the people of the country and the people entering into it. In fact, we are so lucky in the first world, in the West, to have the lives that we have. But unfortunately, if we take a policy of mass immigration, these countries will eventually become places that people don't want to go to or won't be as different as the places they're coming from. And when you look at the amount of people we're helping, it's still such a small percentage of all of the people in devastating circumstances. So it just asks the question, you can keep helping and helping people, but there's always going to be more to help. And unfortunately, this is the reality of war. You know, again, we're so lucky in the West. Historically, there have been all sorts of wars, all sorts of terrible tragedies befalling humankind. And lots of these people had no other choice but to die or but to suffer terrible circumstances. And while war is absolutely horrible, the practicality of just trying to help everyone doesn't really seem to work. So in my opinion, we need to do what we can to prevent the outbreak of war in the world. Maybe Trump will make a difference to that. We need far better vetting and control over immigration. You know, we can take in asylum seekers, but they're not being vetted well. They're not being scrutinized to determine who is an economic migrant over a genuine asylum seeker. And again, let's ask the question, why are we not mainly prioritizing women and children? Why are the majority of people coming over young men? And it is a no-brainer that if you immigrate to a country and you commit crime, whether an economic migrant, an asylum seeker, legal, you should be deported immediately. And this is why the UK wants to leave the ECHR, because even when someone comes here as an asylum seeker, rapes someone, murders someone, they often still avoid leaving by appealing the decision, and then the ECHR ruling in their favor that this is a mental health crisis and you cannot send them back. And Ireland is now becoming more skeptical of the EU because they do not have control over their own borders. If we are going to pursue mass immigration, we need to have offshore processing for illegal migrants. So if they're going to invest millions a day on this, they should take less people and have much better, sturdy, rigorous, secure accommodation that people can stay in. I think people really need to learn that most of us are coming from a good place. There's a big difference between being anti-immigrant and anti-immigration policy. And I'm a pragmatist, I'm a logical person. I tend to favor those over emotion. And I think the sad reality of the human condition is that we're tribal, and that if you just decide to shove of loads of cultures together which are so different and potentially incompatible, it's not going to lead to a good society. And that is just a harsh truth. You know, the world is full of hard truths, but we've become so obsessed with racism and diversity in the West that we're failing to recognize this as a core of human being. If we're going to have a mass immigration policy, we need to have an excellent, well thought out integration policy where people have to learn the language, where people are not just living in neighborhoods that only have people from their country or their religion. France, for example, has even banned certain types of head coverings. And you can argue, is this a legitimate policy? You know, in the UK, there's people, even where I live, there's women in burqas walking around all the time. And you kind of wonder, is this the sort of culture we want to see in our country, where certain women have to cover their whole body just to walk outside? So guys, that's it for today. A bit of a different video for you. So please let me know what you think. How do you feel about it? Have you learned something new today? Do you think I'm just a racist? I would love to hear it. And with that said, I will see you soon for another video. Bye.